Nothing has aged quite as nicely as 2004. In terms of game releases, that is. This is terrible. But this is a masterpiece. "2004 was 20 years ago, which means I was 5 years old. I know it is hard to believe that I too was once 5 years old. I say too because I presume you yourself have just entered the 5-year club. Congratulations. I applaud you. You got 20 more to go until you reach me. I don't know. It doesn't matter if you were a PlayStation fan, an Xbox fan, a Nintendo fan, you were eating good in the year 2004. If you were big enough to eat. A lot of these games I didn't get to experience when they came out, so naturally some context of what was happening in the industry might be a little bit lost on me when I go through this video. However, I have played through the best of the best that 2004 has to offer, and I've got quite a few opinions to say of it, and what better way to express opinions than to go through a list, a top, a 25 of video games of 2004. That's what we're doing here. But first, there are a few honorable mentions that were released in 2004 that I want to go over, the biggest one being Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Many actually argue that this is the best Metal Gear game to have ever existed. Some would even say this was the best 2004 had to offer, but the reason I'm saving it as an honorable mention is because I'm simply not super into stealth shooter games. I have tried many times to enter the Metal Gear series and have had just not the best luck with that. However, I definitely recognize it's a well-crafted game, and some of the things still stood out to someone who's not into the genre like myself, such as the camo system, being able to paint yourself depending on which scenery you want to hide in. I just have a hard time with those kind of games. Not necessarily difficulty, but a little bit difficulty and a little bit just like, oh my gosh, I just want to play the game. I just want to play the game. But I feel like I should at least mention it in this list of top 24 instead of ranking it pretty poorly when it should be ranked pretty high. Hopefully that suffices. Another one I want to mention is World of Warcraft. The reason I'm making this one an honorable mention is because when the game came out, it was unlike anything we've ever seen. It was a social phenomenon. It paved the way for pretty much every MMO moving forward, having it being structured similar to what WoW did in its heydays. I was also 5 years old when it came out, so I wasn't really able to experience the phenomenon when it happened. And if you go back and play WoW today, the game has changed quite a bit. There's many different versions of WoW. Even if I were to go play Classic, I wouldn't really be able to relive the significance properly of just how impactful a game like WoW was when it first came out. Also, I know when some people hear WoW today, a lot of negative connotations are kind of associated with that. Personally, in my circles, I've been a bit of a WoW sympathizer. I do see that the funnest moments of WoW is still fun that I haven't found in any other games, even though I've only played maybe 3 months of it back when everyone was on lockdown, you know? The last honorable mention is PictoChat. The DS was released right at the end of 2004 here, and I absolutely love PictoChat. Debatably not a game. I think it's fun. I think it's also the most social form of texting because everybody was in the same room. This was before smartphones, by the way. The fact that we could draw pictures and send messages at the same time, but not at a distance, right next to each other, and we could laugh and react towards it. There was something kind of special about that. Nowadays, I think there's a lot of anti-socialism kind of implied with texting, but back with the DS, when you're all in the same room, it really was the most social way you could be sending messages to another person. You see them real time, react to it. When you combine that with the fact that pretty much every kid I knew had a DS and there was always rooms to be chatting in when you were in a social gathering, there's something really, really special about that. So honorable mention, but I wouldn't bump another game on the list for it. Number 25, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. This is just classic Kirby fun. It's got the upbeat visuals with the upbeat music, the beautiful animations of Kirby doing just funny things that are goofy. It does have a neat mechanic where you can summon Kirby friends to go with you. I imagine in multiplayer that is a much more fun thing to attempt. I did not attempt multiplayer, but even having some NPCs to appear and have their own power-ups and their minds of their own can be kind of fun, even though they're pretty jank as CPUs and they just disappear half the time, but that's okay. It's still a really solid Kirby game. Number 24 is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords. Quite a lengthy name and quite a lengthy game. This is definitely one of those games that I would only enjoy at the stage of my life that I'm currently in. Had I played this when it came out as a 5-year-old, obviously I would not... I would have no idea what I'm doing. The systems are very complex, but understandable when you give it some time and really try to figure things out. I think what's interesting is the first starting area, you are locked inside of a ship that is pretty much abandoned except for some robots. Within the ship, you kind of forget that you're in a tutorial setting because you do feel the stakes are pretty high. You don't know how much longer you can live here. There are robots who are coming out to kill you, but this game's got a lot of interesting story developed behind it, as well as character interactions utilizing choose your own dialogue options, and I think it's just a fun time to play through, something I need to give more time, but fun nonetheless. Number 23 is Katamari Damacy. I think I pronounced that correct. This game's got one giant ball that you roll around. Wow, I seem to really like games where you roll balls. I don't know why. This game is really a spectacle. You're not gonna find this level of gameplay pretty much anywhere else. The whole concept of this game feels like a toddler made it, and yet it's hilarious. It's wonderful. You roll around this ball and just make that ball bigger by colliding into things. And if something is too big to collide into, you go back, get some smaller things, make it big enough until you roll them over. Eventually, you can even roll over human. And it's something with super cheery and bonkers visuals. Tie that with this underlying level of stress because you're on a time limit this whole time and the ball is a little bit tough to control. But the main thing that sticks out to me for sure is that theme song. You get that stuck in your head for 1 second, it's there forever. That's why I'm not even thinking about it right now. I don't want it to get stuck in my head. Kind of sucks for you though, because I'm playing it, aren't I? Number 22 is Cave Story. Honestly, it's a game that's a little bit more difficult to appreciate without understanding the background behind it, but this really was the indie game that could, and you could chart this back as maybe one of the very first indie games that became more than just an individual programmer programming something on his computer, because this was made by one person. It somehow resonated with people enough to eventually snowball into becoming a game licensed by Nintendo on their system. I think functionality-wise, maybe it's not the most polished thing out there if you play today. Some of the level layout's a little bit bizarre and some of the enemies and the challenge is kind of all over the place. However, just from the spectacle of being made by one person alone and showing that indie games can make it in this world of AAA, I think that alone is something pretty special, which is why I have no problem calling this the first indie game. It's not, but it's the first one that really showed that you can do indie games like that. Number 21 is Counter-Strike Source. If you don't know, Counter-Strike was originally a mod of Half-Life, which is pretty wild, and people ended up playing this mod a lot to the point that it became one of the biggest competitive esports out there. But Counter-Strike Source specifically is a remake of the original mod, except much more polished and powerful using the Source engine, which at the time of 2004, pretty new engine. It was pretty badass. People were talking about it. You couldn't walk down the street without someone going, hey, you seen the Source engine? Oh yeah, I saw that Source engine. Yeah, it was pretty something. Yeah, it's pretty something. That's just how people talked back then. And I know because I was 5 years old. What's crazy about Counter-Strike Source is you can actually play it today, which I did. I mean, not today, but you can play it today, and there will still be a bunch of players online enjoying the game. And you get to see the original versions of maps that have later been expanded to the point that they can now be played on stage in front of thousands of people for a ridiculous amount of money. It's pretty wild. But of course, the main thing Counter-Strike did offer, which there was a little bit of a lack of in the video game market at the time, was non-arcadic FPS shooting style games. Does that make sense? Meaning you're not really relying on Quake style power-ups or wacky weapons. You have stuff that mimics real life weapons, and it's as simple as you shoot them, they take a ton of damage, and then they almost die. It was a style that was honestly just pretty overlooked at its time. You didn't find many games like that. But Counter-Strike Source really laid out the foundations for skill-based competitive shooting games. And now we have games like CSGO, which is ultra skill-based and the most competitive shooter out there, I would argue. And a lot of that is thanks to the well-executed aspects of Counter-Strike Source. It's still fun today. It still feels polished. You should give it a shot. You'll still find players. A lot of stills. Still Counter-Strike Source. Number 20 is The Legend of Zelda: Four Swords Adventures. This is probably one of the most underlooked Zelda games, and it's not for horrible reason. When you have Four Swords in a lineup with all of the other really good Zelda games, it's going to make it tough for you to zero in on this one and pick it up and play it. All that said, it is a pretty dang solid Zelda game, and also one of the few Zelda games that incorporates multiplayer into its main campaign, if you had the supplies to do it. I've had a copy of this game pretty much my whole life, and never once have I had the opportunity to try out the multiplayer.
It's Editor Nat again. I just wanted to say that Pat did indeed try the multiplayer since recording this.
You would need a Game Boy Advance as well as a Game Boy Advance to GameCube connector. Me and my whole circle never had access to any of that, so I just played through the single player, but the single player in and of itself is pretty fun. It's your pretty average top-down Zelda experience, except for the combination of having 4 different Zeldas at your disposal allows you to do some interesting combinations and progress in the game in interesting ways. You can send people to wait in certain areas while you send other people to wait in other areas, and then of course you can fight in a diamond combination, which is pretty rad if you ask me. The last thing I want to mention is that visually the game is very appealing, because even though it is a 2D top-down game, there's a lot of things the GameCube is able to render in and pop out at your face, making it a pretty mystical, wondrous, full of whimsy Zelda game. So I would try it out if I were you. Give it a shot. Number 19 is Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal. This is the only Ratchet & Clank game I've played, and I only played it because I was doing research on games released in 2004, and I'm very glad I gave it a shot because it is a pretty solid experience. It's no secret that I'm really into 3D platformers, and Ratchet & Clank is more than just a 3D platformer. It's a 3D platformer that mixes in a little bit of hack and slash as well as third-person shooting, which seems like a bizarre combination and maybe is what stopped me from playing Ratchet & Clank in the past. However, the game mixes them really well. I actually didn't get super frustrated with the fact that I don't know how to shoot while maneuvering. The auto lock seems to do a decent enough job of taking care of that for me. And the hack and slash just feels pretty satisfying, especially when they explode into bits that you then use to buy more weapons in the future. That aspect of collecting while attacking, and then also a couple of platforming moments here and there, makes Ratchet & Clank just a pretty solid time all the way through. Something that was also a bit of a surprise is that it's not an easy game. It's pretty challenging. I mean, I could just be bad, but I died several times in my time playing and only got frustrated maybe one of the times. Last thing I want to mention is there is a flame whip you get pretty early on, which is rad and awesome, and you can throw it. How many games let you throw a flaming whip? Ratchet & Clank's got to be the only one, which gives it a nice spot here on this list. Number 18 is Pitfall: The Lost Expedition. This is a game you have probably never heard of. I completely never heard of this game, except for back when I had this game and played it all the time. It slipped my memory, but I had this game at the age of 5, one of the few on this list that I actually owned and played when it came out. Pitfall was originally a series on the Atari, a relatively popular one too. It's one of those things you can imagine would be difficult to translate into that more modern generation. Less modern now, but modern then. And yet somehow it is a pretty dang solid 3D platformer collectathon. Yo, did you say 3D platformer? Yeah, I did say 3D platformer. Oh my gosh, I love those. And collectathon? Yeah, collectathon too. Oh, really? Really? I do love 3D platformer collectathons, but I've also gotten a pretty good feel for which ones are executed properly and which ones are executed less properly. Pitfall's pretty properly executed. Platforming feels pretty dang good. The upgrades are all unique in their own ways that not just increase attack, but sometimes increase mobility as well, which is always a plus. The platforms that you jump on are integrated well within the environment, another thing I talk about often. And that's just the raw gameplay. This game is also an exciting adventure game, and every part of this game is actually pretty dang exciting. You run across lava, use ice picks to climb up an ice wall, you swim through the depths. It just feels like an Indiana Jones movie, except for one thing. It has culturally aged worse. A lot of the game you are beating up the natives and they make this noise. That probably wouldn't fly today. And Harry might have committed some light essay in the introduction screen, which, that's, essay does not fly. Does not fly today. And neither does the plane they were on when it happened. Other than that, it's a fun time. Number 17 is the only one that I have a prop for. Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, which uses this. These are bongos. If you don't know what these are, it's because they've only been in like a handful of games. Donkey Kong Jungle Beat is a platformer that utilizes the bongos like by preference and maybe by force. I don't know if DK will like beat you up or something if you don't use these when you play, but surprisingly you play the whole game by moving and jumping and everything else, attacking everything with just these two buttons as well as the microphone, which the pro tip is to just slap the bongos as opposed to clapping. I played this the other day and I was fortunate enough to play with the DK bongos because I still have 4 of these. And that's right, if you guys want to come over, play some Donkey Konga, I got you. Jungle Beat is a great time. It's a little bit finicky, I'll be the first to say that. It feels unnatural when you are moving with the bongos, and for a while when you fall off the first couple jumps, you get a little bit frustrated, but eventually, similar to Katamari Damacy, again, I hope I said that right, you just get the hang of it. What shines most with this game is the beat aspect. You know, the way the music interacts with the controls and the visuals is very satisfying. Anytime you accomplish something, you get that stimulation of boom, visual effect happening, also the music, and yeah, you just feel good about yourself playing these bongos, like, yeah, I'm making Donkey Kong do this. Also, there's some fun boss fights where you literally get into a fist showdown with some random Kongs we've never seen outside of this game. I also think there's just a lot of clever ways they were able to incorporate challenges with such a limited controller set. The amount of different things Donkey Kong can do when really all you're doing is pushing 2 buttons and clapping here and there, or tapping the sides, I'm a pro. It's just impressive and a fun arcade time. If this was in an arcade, I would waste a lot of quarters on it. If that's not a sparkling review, I don't know what is. Number 16 is Pokemon Emerald, Pokemon Fire Red, Pokemon Leaf Green. Oh, sorry, you didn't catch that? There were 3 different Pokemon games released in 2004, but we all know how Pokemon releases their games. Somehow they get away with releasing the same game twice, just with different names, and they get away with it because we're like, I guess they've always done it. It's intent. What are you gonna do? Even Pokemon Emerald was a remake of 2 previous Pokemon games before it, and Fire Red and Leaf Green also remakes of the first Pokemon games. I think for all intensive purposes, this slot would kind of go towards Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, because even though they are remakes of the original, they are brand new remakes of the original. Putting that game on the engine that runs the usual Game Boy Advance Pokemon games was a really smart idea, and I think honestly the best way to experience those older games in the modern era. It's also worth mentioning in this game, you can run. Couldn't do that in the originals. That's pretty nice. You can also just catch a Pikachu in the wild. So for all of you normies out there who need Pikachu in their arsenal, like me, now we can do it. I mean, Pokemon is Pokemon. It's great. It's always great. Almost always. Lately, not so much, but it used to be. Number 15 is Unreal Tournament 2004. Can you guess when this game was released? It's very possible some of you guys don't actually know what Unreal Tournament is, even though you know what Epic Games is and what Fortnite is and every other game that uses the Unreal Engine. You probably know what the Unreal Engine is. Well, it was all popularized from Unreal Tournament, a series of Quake-style shooters that was released that also featured an engine that you could actually make your own levels in. That stuff was pretty complicated, and I know, because I actually had to buy this game for a 3D modeling class, and we made levels on it, and I have none of that to show you, but I do have gameplay to show you, which is great. In fact, you can actually play this game online still, with very, very few players and really, really laggy servers. You essentially have to mod the server browser back into the game, and I tried it, and it wasn't the best experience, but hey, playing against CPUs is still pretty fun. The best way to describe this game is if Quake arena style combat met large scale battles similar to like Battlefront or other things of that nature. Because you have both. Within a tournament, you might play in an open field where you have to capture objectives with a ton of troops aside you, maybe 16 of them or something. And then you also have the close combat matches where rocket launchers are insanely overpowered, as they always are in this type of game. The combination of the 2 playstyles alone might be a reason you pick this up over Quake. Everything else meets around the same level of quality, and if you like Quake-style games, you'd probably like this game as well. It's a pretty solid entry with neat vehicles. I love me some neat vehicles. Number 14 is Fire Emblem, The Sacred Stones. If you are a Fire Emblem fan, first of all, let me just say that is not nerdy at all. That is very, very cool of you. And second of all, if you're a Fire Emblem fan, you might be thinking, Pat, Sacred Stones is not that great. But I think the reason you feel that way is because of the previous Fire Emblem title, called Fire Emblem here in the United States, on the same system, with the same engine, might just be better. I don't know, I think it's up for debate. But one thing about Sacred Stones I really like is that I do feel like it's a little bit more of an accessible Fire Emblem than its previous installment. I feel like it takes all of what's good of the original Fire Emblem and just makes it a little bit easier to get into. A big reason Sacred Stones is accessible is because of of the monster tower that they actually have. There might even be 2 of them, maybe I'm misremembering that, but in this monster tower you can actually go in and grind your units in between chapters, which is something that, again, maybe makes things a little bit too easy because you can grind to your heart's extent. But honestly, I think by concept alone, it's something that more Fire Emblems should introduce. The idea that you are able to train yourself in between the chapters. And when you lose a chapter, you lose all of the progress you made in leveling up when you go back to the beginning. Everything else about the game is also just pretty dang solid. It's your usual Fire Emblem experience with pretty intricate yet understandable stats and some light JRPG elements that just in general makes Fire Emblem in and of itself an accessible way to experience RPGs. Number 13 is Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Some of you might be thinking this is a little bit of a high placement for the game. After all, it was pretty groundbreaking for its time. I have a lot of fun with GTA games, but it's rarely something I will see through completion like most of the other entries in this list. I definitely didn't play the GTA before this one, but I can understand that this one brought in a lot of new mechanics that the previous ones didn't, as well as just ironed out some of the everyday things that we take for granted when we pop up GTA 5 every once in a while with our friends because someone brings it up, and then you download the gigabytes and then you play, and then y'all just kind of stop playing, and you're like, well, I just downloaded the game. We're getting off topic. But GTA San Andreas also introduced San Andreas, which was a really fun world to explore both in this game as well, of course, GTA 5. It's just a really vast world and one that's pretty reminiscent of actual Los Angeles. As someone who has lived in SoCal my whole life, I still have only been to Los Angeles a couple handful of times, but there's still this weird thing where when I drive by LAX, I get visions of San Andreas saying like, man, this looks a lot like San Andreas. And I'm sure that's to a much higher extent to people who don't even live in Southern California, but that's just how faithful this was to Los Angeles. And San Andreas specifically references a lot of important history moments of Los Angeles as well. The way this game is able to both parody those impactful moments as well as shed light on them because they don't want that to be forgotten is kind of beautifully done. And I think it's something that GTA maybe doesn't get enough recognition from in general as a series. We take GTA for granted in general, but at the time of San Andreas's release, it was nothing like anything else that had been released before, and definitely laid out the groundworks for future GTA games to come afterwards. Number 12 is Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 Thrill Pack. Technically, this is a collection game because it mixes in Roller Coaster Tycoon and Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, but I'm allowing it on the list just because the combination of the two is actually really helpful. Because the game uses the same engine, having the challenges from both games all in one just makes sense, and it's the best way to experience either of those games. And I could go on and on about how Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 is still the best Roller Coaster Tycoon game out there, or just Roller Coaster Simulator game in general, but why would I do that when I can let my buddy Weirdo Maxim here introduce the game for himself so you can see what he thinks about it. Take it away.
I used to play Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 Thriller Park a lot when I was very young. From managing streets, making theme areas, having stalls, and making the park clean, from having a lot of bins all around the world, and of course, making roller coasters. It was really cool to experiment and explore, especially back in those days when games were not that heavy loaded. And honestly, it was really fun, and I really want to get back into it again. We don't talk about the dead kids though.
Number 11 is Sly 2, Band of Thieves. The Sly Cooper series is another one that I've been really sleeping on until I did research for this video, and Sly 2 is pretty dang awesome. Of course, the thing that stands out the most to me is just how everything is set up like it's a Saturday morning cartoon / comic book. And then of course, we're talking about another 3D platformer. That's all me. That's all me. But Sly 2 introduces things that really sets it apart from other 3D platformers. A big thing being that because the game is all spy themed, there's a lot of spy themed gameplay elements that you just don't find elsewhere, such as espionage missions. It's pretty cool that there is a mission where you just trail someone along taking pictures and trying to gather intel on what they're doing so that you can, I don't even remember why, but that's a thing that happens. So there's all these other more cinematic elements, for lack of a better word, that you mix in with the general collecting and platforming style, which makes for a game that's easily able to stand on its behind two legs. And of course, the characters are just utterly charming. Each one has their own personality, well-executed voice acting, and something that makes you feel like you are sitting down and enjoying a cartoon until you remember, oh shit, I gotta pick up the controller and actually play this game. Great style, great theming, pretty dang good gameplay, a solid title for sure, and it is a game that I am proud to put on my list. Now this is exciting, fellas. We're down to the top 10 games of 2004. But first, a word from our sponsor. Number 10 is Spider-Man 2. Now, depending on how many eras of gaming you've been through, you might hear a licensed title like Spider-Man 2 and think, boy, a licensed game on the list of the best? What is that? But then also, depending on what gaming area you're from, you might think, oh, like The Amazing Spider-Man. That game was incredible.
Editor Nat here again. Pat repeatedly says The Amazing Spider-Man when really he means Marvel Spider-Man, the more modern versions.
But there's also some of you that have played Spider-Man 2 and understand that Spider-Man 2 was not like any other game out there. And that's because of one primary thing. It's a lot of things, but one primary thing. Was I wearing my glasses before? The camera was overheating, and I've just realized there might be a big continuity difference here. We're rolling with it. We're rolling. The primary thing is the web slinging mechanics. It's something that was so good and often praised for because future Spider-Man games didn't have it for the longest time. I have not played The Amazing Spider-Man or its sequels, and I imagine, given the reception of how much people like them, the web swinging is probably really good in that game too. But for a long time, web swinging was kind of trash. Like, after Spider-Man 2, they just gave up and decided they didn't need web to actually hook onto buildings to give you momentum and torque to swing around. I don't even know if torque's the right term there, but torque's a fun word, so I'm using it. But the second biggest thing that this game has is actual voice acting from the actors of the Spider-Man movie. Not all the actors, but it has Tobey Maguire, and then it also has
Bruce Campbell,
which I think is really funny because he's not a very big part in Spider-Man, yet he makes a perfect narrator in this game. Most of the comedy just comes from his one-offs here and there.
Well, sequel time already, huh? Welcome back, I guess. I'm sure you miss me more than I missed you.
The combat in Spider-Man is actually pretty admirable, especially for a licensed game of that era, which licensed games that time were not doing fantastic. Another game in 2004 was Shrek 2. You might notice that's not on my list. I feel like I'm getting off track. Combos. That's a thing that's in Spider-Man 2, and it's pretty fun. There's definitely a lot of times I'm pushing buttons and I don't really know what's making me do what, but I'm having a great time because I've beaten everyone up and I'm shooting web in people's faces and I'm launching people away or up in the sky. You can just uppercut people over and over again, and you could win the game that way. It's actually really crazy. Spider-Man 2 is honestly a great time. If you're a fan of Spider-Man or you're a fan of Spider-Man style games, Spider-Man 2 holds a candle to the rest of them that's been released before and after. Number 9 is Metroid Zero Mission. I'm a Metroid fan, and I really had to hold back by putting Metroid this higher up, but it's just because we got bangers after this, all right? Zero Mission is great. It is a remake of the original Metroid and definitely the best edition of the original Metroid. There's still reason to go back and play the original, but for the most part, Metroid Zero Mission is experiencing those levels and those bosses, but in a much more modern format. The game uses a lot of mechanics that were from Metroid Fusion, but the biggest problem people had with Metroid Fusion was that it is occasionally handholdy and so much dialogue that slows you down. Not Zero Mission. Zero Mission is very fast. Boom, 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 boom. You just go, you play, you turn on, you're having fun. It also, of course, introduces Zero Suit Samus, which in turns introduces a level of gameplay that is in a couple of Metroid games now, involving Samus without all of her equipment and usual weapons at her disposal. Basically a nice little padding on the gameplay that was already established in the original Metroid game. It's beautiful, it sounds great, it's fun all the way through. It's honestly a great time and a great Metroid and a great game that was released in 2004. Number 8 is Super Mario 64 for the Nintendo DS. That's right, the Nintendo DS had just barely come out and we got this banger of a game that frankly should be talked about a little bit more often than it is. It is just a remake of Mario 64, except it's not. It's a lot more than that. Not only do they add different characters that you could play, such as Luigi, Wario, and Yoshi, but also it adds a ton of new stars and minigames. I don't know if you guys have played the minigames on Mario 64 DS, but oh my gosh. This game is primarily snubbed for one reason and one reason alone, which is the fact that there is no joystick. It is using a D-pad for movement, and it gets annoying more often than not. I'm not going to pretend that it's not a problem. It is a problem, and it's gotten me frustrated many times before, but it's not big enough to overshadow all the other great qualities of the game. Funny enough, a remake of another game is like the thing we need a remake of the most right now. Just put Mario 64 DS on a home console with the joystick, and we're like actually in heaven, probably. Am I levitating? Number 7 is The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap, or The Minish Cap, I don't know. don't know which name it is. This one was technically released in 2005 in the US, but it was 2004 somewhere. I honestly think that Minish Cap has the most clever use of puzzles in any of the top-down Zelda games, except for maybe some of the DS versions. The puzzles are just extremely satisfying, and it's not because Zelda can shrink down to an ant size, but also because they're just clever. Like, they know what they're doing in that game. I also think that visually this game is really impressive. They packed so much detail into every square pixel of things, and then when you turn tiny and explore, suddenly all those pixels expand to even more detail that is much bigger form. I don't know if any of this is making sense. Hopefully the footage is helping out. There's also these cool collectibles in the game that really encourage you to explore and talk to other NPCs, because you need to match people's, I think they're called keystones, together, and through doing that, you are reading through dialogue of different people, you're learning more about the world, and it gives a great incentive to actually explore. I honestly think it's almost a perfect Zelda game. Some things are still a little bit tedious with the game, things that you would expect to happen immediately. Sometimes you have to wait over and over again for like, oh, the song is playing, oh, the dialogue's going, oh, I was mashing the button. But it is a super fun Zelda experience, and I think one that is just up and up. Number 6 is Halo 2. This might be the only Xbox exclusive banger this year, but this banger, like, fed a lot of people. If you had an Xbox, you were fed from this banger alone. It's really hard to express how much of an impact Halo 2 had when the whole Halo movement was like a giant snowball that just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And all I knew was it was a game I couldn't play. I didn't have an Xbox, but everyone was talking about it at the time. But honestly, playing Halo 2 today is a more enjoyable experience to me than playing the original Halo. I find that the missions feel less repetitive. The narrative is a little bit easier to follow. Of course, visually, it's pushed just a little bit more, even though the original Halo already still looks great. And of course, there's just more weapons and vehicles added into the multiplayer, which is a ton of fun. That is, after all, where Halo truly shines. And I just think Halo 2 is a great pinnacle of the series. Maybe not the highest pinnacle, if there is such a scale of pinnacles, but it is a really good installment to the series. Number 5 is Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. I've had this game for a very long time, and admittedly as a kid, I just couldn't get far into it. Like, I would get stuck immediately. But I have grown to appreciate it a lot more since playing it for this video. I love the mix of real-time combat with turn-based combat, as well as the interesting mechanics they can add with the theater people watching, giving you just another thing to be constantly thinking about. And that's just with gameplay alone. Something else that sticks out to me a lot is just how lively the world is. I would argue that the world in this game is more lively than any other Mario game, including modern ones like Mario Odyssey. Characters just walk around, they have agendas, they do things, they talk to you, they interact, they randomly rush by you. This game is also great at just taking a random individual and shoving a backstory in them and having them have a character and interactions and become a main character and join your party and whatnot. I think there's just something really to be said about that. The world feels alive, and that's great. You know what's also great is my buddy Thomas J. Ashwell, who actually just finished up his Let's Play series on Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. Thomas, take it away.
My favorite thing about the Thousand-Year Door is the impact that Mario has on both his partners and the other people that he just meets throughout the game. Characters like Koops become a lot more confident as time goes on. Flurry rediscovers her passion for theater and gets back into it at the end of the game. Heck, Mario basically raises the Yoshi kid from birth. Just everywhere he goes, it's shown that he has this positive influence on everybody that he meets. If you want to get more technical, I like the battles, I like the gameplay, I like action commands, I like being able to super guard things, but I think my absolute favorite thing is just Mario's obvious impact on the world.
Number 4 is Half-Life 2. Motorboats. The motorboat section of this game, that alone puts it on the list. But it's also a fantastic game. I was one of the few people in my circle who wasn't really in the fandom of Valve's upbringing, but I did see a lot of it after the fact, and there are a lot of things I can appreciate about it. The source engine, as we previously mentioned with Counter-Strike, was very impressive and also allowed for some interesting physics to be incorporated into regular gameplay. Half-Life 2 has some jank physics, and yet somehow they work super well within the game that they're in. Having full control of these boxes, you know, games don't let you do that for a reason. And yet suddenly it works. You're able to solve the puzzles almost effortlessly with the jankness already in place. It's also just a fast-paced shooter, like mobility-wise fast. You run like crazy in that game, and it feels great. You're Sonic the Hedgehog shooting down your enemies as you go collect your rings, except there's no rings. In this game, there's ammo and health, and you need those things. This game can be hard sometimes. Conversations that people have seem to have a lot of emotion in them, and you can even see some emotion just in the way they are expressing themselves through character animation. And I think it's just one of those games that is a fast-paced blast from the beginning to the end. I imagine I still haven't beaten it yet, but rest assured I will, because this game is fun enough to complete. Take that. We are now entering the top 3 of 2004. And I will say, there's definitely some bias here. This is my list after all, and a lot of this is placed off of emotions and experiences that I've had with these games. Here we go. Number 3 is Metroid Prime 2. Now, some of you may be thinking, Pat, how is Metroid Prime 2 number 3 when you've previously said that Metroid Prime 2 is your favorite game of all time? Well, that 100% bias clause has an asterisk. That's an underline, and then an asterisk. And the asterisk says, sometimes I have to acknowledge that a game hits me at the right time in the right place. And that really is the case with Metroid Prime 2. It was the first game that I felt a little bit of a more intimate connection with. No, not in an intimate way, but in an intimate way. It was just me in the game, and I think it was the first time I started recognizing the game as an expression of art, something that I could connect with as an audience staring at a painting on the wall. And the connection I felt was not felt by anyone else in the room. No one told me to like Metroid Prime 2. I just liked it because it was fun. And I think that was the first time I felt that. But I recognize the next couple games maybe surpass it in just level of significance, as well as the way it pinnacly stands out. I'm using pinnacle so much. The way it pinnacly stands out. That's a lot of ways to say Metroid Prime 2 is only number 3. However, it is still a killer game. It is a Metroid Prime game. What can you expect? The worlds you explore and the music that plays with those worlds, all while you're experiencing everything as a singular character within the game, alone, isolated. It's all fantastic. It also does something that makes it really stand out from the original Metroid Prime, hence why I actually prefer playing this one over the original. The mapping of levels is laid out a little bit nicer. It makes backtracking feel much more natural as opposed to something that you just have to do as a chore in the original Metroid Prime. If you finish an objective in this one spot, it does a great job at taking you back to the spot that you need to be, making progression feel like a natural path. Now, some people might have an issue with the idea of a linear path, but the trick is to make a linear path that doesn't feel linear, and Metroid Prime, of course, never feels linear. Metroid Prime 2 is what I mean. I also really like the way weapons are done in this game. They have this ammo mechanic, which adds a lot of weight to which beam you can use, especially because if you shoot creatures with a light beam, you're going to get dark beam ammo, and you shoot them with a dark beam, you're going to get light beam ammo. So you're constantly choosing between which beams you want to use. Both beams, of course, light beam and dark beam, are different from each other and have different long-term effects. The dark beam will freeze, while the light beam will just start burning them. Pretty simple stuff, but it's just a nice contrast to beams in the previous Metroid game where pretty much one of them was always better than the other. Metroid Prime 2 also has a multiplayer. I can confidently say if you challenge me at that, I will beat you. I'm sorry, because I'm the only person who's ever played it. I also want to mention that the bosses in Metroid Prime 2 are so badass. I think my favorite Metroid boss of all time is Quadraxis, who is a giant robot. You literally have to be a morph ball to climb up his legs and to place bombs in certain areas. Downright epic. Also, having a rival that you're constantly running into is a simple mechanic, yet a really effective one at making you feel like, oh, I gotta get better than this person. All that to eventually realize that, like, oh, this guy is kind of Metroid Prime. That's weird. It's hard to explain why this game sticks with me for so much, but I feel like it's pretty easy to see that this is a high quality game that deserves this spot here on the 2004 games list. Number 2 is Star Wars Battlefront. The original, it's great, it's a ton of fun. It is essentially mass warfare turned into the IP of Star Wars, and it's frankly the best Star Wars IP I've ever played. Now, I would traditionally play the second one over this, but that's by no means a knock against this one. In fact, many of the maps that are in Star Wars Battlefront I prefer over some of the maps in Star Wars Battlefront 2. And the maps are what make this game so much fun. The fact that you can visit all of these different Star Wars locations and experience them as just another numbered unit is really exciting. I also think it's really fun that you can choose between Stormtroopers versus Rebels or CIS versus Clone Troopers, as all 4 of them have their own features and their own stats, making them interesting classes to play. And when you pick a map, you stand there thinking for a while, like, man, who do I want to play today? Do I want to be the Empire? Do I want to be the Clone Troopers? Do I want to be on the CIS, the Rebels? And the fact that you can choose a class from any of those and have it be unique to itself, there's a lot of classes to be had there. I'm also in general just a sucker for the command point style gameplay. It adds a lot of weight to objective play as opposed to just run and gun. Vehicles are OP. I'm just gonna say it, and that's okay, because you guys both got vehicles. Sometimes, sometimes you don't. Galactic Conquest is also great. You literally go capture every single planet in the solar system before the other people do. It's a little bit bare bones compared to the future installment, but it also has a little bit less whack. So kind of 50-50 as to which Galactic Conquest is better. All in all, Star Wars Battlefront is incredible, and it is unfortunate that the remake didn't do it justice. That's okay. We still have the old one on Steam. You and I can play together one day. Hit me up. We'll do it. I'll make time. I'll always make time for Battlefront. And now it is time for number 1. But before we say that, a quick word from our sponsor. I'm joking. I'm just a funny guy. But I do want to say thank you for watching. And make sure you subscribe if you want to see more videos like this as they get cranking up and rolling out again. Hopefully. We'll see. Fingers. They crossed. Number 1 is Pikmin 2. Now, the reason I put Pikmin 2 at number 1 is because, again, like some of the other games on this list, there is really no other game like Pikmin. And Pikmin 2 is the pinnacle of the Pikmin series, still my favorite to this day. There is an unbelievable amount of content packed into this game, between the different worlds you can explore, the many treasures, the post-game, as well as every individual cave, some of which have so many levels. It's just really impressive, and I don't feel like they tapped back into that level of content until the most recent one, Pikmin 4. Even then, it doesn't quite compare. If we also go back in time to 2004, when we're fresh from Pikmin, not that fresh, but a little fresh from the original Pikmin, we probably may have noticed, hey, Pikmin 2 really cleaned up a lot of the wonky mechanics, didn't they? Something that's really never discussed about Pikmin 2 is the fact that it has a multiplayer mode, and not just a multiplayer mode, but a great multiplayer mode. It has one of those things I would call sibling multiplayer, because really you're not gonna be able to play this with a friend. A friend's not gonna come over and be like, man, really wanna play some of that Pikmin, you know? I've had enough Smash Brothers. I don't need no Mario Party. Give me some Pikmin multiplayer, man, let's do it. They don't say that, which is unfortunate. But when you have a sibling, you play all your games. And I played this game with my siblings a whole lot. And I think that's actually a big reason Pikmin 2 means as much as it does to me as it does. It was a pretty good bonding experience between us, and it always has been a pretty bonding experience. And a big part of that is just the level of commitment you go into when you play one of these multiplayer matches. They can be long and grueling, and you start from 5 Pikmin and can get all the way up to 50 as you fight back and forth tug-of-war style, trying to get the most treasures from the other person. You can also play cooperatively, which is also a great time. I've been yapping and yapping, and I haven't even mentioned one of the best parts of this game, which of course is the atmosphere. Every time that Forest of Hope song comes on, I'm just... But it's not just joyful music. Sometimes it's really intense or eerie or just anxiety music, which really adds to the bizarre charm of Pikmin. I just love the concepts. I love the execution of the concepts. I love the package. I love the atmosphere. I love the multiplayer. I love everything about Pikmin 2. Pikmin is comfort. Pikmin is stress. Pikmin is planning. Pikmin is life. While watching, you may have noticed that a couple of these games had this seal on it. This is my top 100 games seal, because I made a video about my top 100 games of all time. If you liked this video, chances are you'll probably like that one as well, so feel free to go check it out. And of course, other than that, you may subscribe. And I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you for watching. So long.